Hey everyone, it's Tim from Linessa Farms Specialty and Heirloom Livestock. Thanks for joining us again today. Hope everyone is doing well. So we are just doing a general question and answer forum tonight. If you have any questions, anything at all that I can help you out with, please let me know. I will respond to everyone as much as I possibly can, assuming that I know the answer to your question. So things are starting to warm up here. We'll probably be putting our animals out on rotational grazing pastures here, usually around the end of April. We like to let the grasses get a little higher before we put them out. We get some questions a lot about, if you are to plant a pasture early in the year, or maybe you've got something that you need to kind of work on, maybe correct or do some planting of new species of grasses or whatnot. Sometimes people will ask about grazing that. You got to be really careful about grazing freshly sown fields until that root structure has a chance to take hold. What will end up happening a lot of times is the animals will go out there and they will just rip it out, root and all. And we've seen that happen a lot. We've seen people invest lots and lots of money in overseeding or planting pastures, and they don't give it enough time to get developed, and the animals just go out there and completely destroy it. And then you're left with a dirt lot that you end up having to replant again. So a lot of times what we do and what we see a lot of people do is if they plant a field, they may bale it for the first year or let it sit idle and just mow it for the first year and then let the animals go out on it second year. I know some individuals that have planted in the spring and put animals on it in the late fall, but most definitely, unless it's going to be like a seasonal grass or something like that, they're going to get out there and the plan is, it's only going to live and then it's going to die and not able to be replaced. It's going to have to be reseeded. That's a completely different thing. You see that in things like teff grass and things like that. So, you just got to play it by ear. Be careful. We don't want anybody spending a lot of money and then you end up, in trouble. So hi to everyone. If you're new to joining us, you can actually just type your questions in the comment section and I can respond live. If you just want to hang out and watch, that's fine too. I see my friend Tim Lawson here said hello. Hi, Tim. Nice to see you. Hope you are doing well. So a couple things we've been getting recently on the Tack box questions that we've been getting. We've been getting mange. We get lots and lots of mange questions, especially when it comes to goats. A lot of times you'll see mange start to affect around the eyes, on the ears. You may start to see kind of crusties around the eyes or crusties on the ears. And then on the back side of the front legs is another one that's really heavily hit by mange, and a lot of times you'll see them biting and getting bare spots. The other thing you may see is on the scrotum. You may see that there's a bare spot on the scrotum of the animal. A lot of times that's a sign of mange as well. When I treat for mange, I like to treat twofold. I like to treat with Dectomax and I like to treat with Silence. So Silence is your pour-on and Dectomax is injectable. I feel that those both in conjunction with each other work well. We've used it successfully here on our farm for probably about 5 years now without any ill effects. We also, if it's a bad case, we will actually treat twice, 7 days apart. So just something to keep in mind. I've been getting lots of questions about limping. So limping is something that you want to address as soon as possible. If you see an animal that is limping on 1 foot, multiple feet, whatever, you need to get a hold of them. You need to take a look at them. Now, hoof rot, it can, you can get hoof rot, you can get hoof scald. You can also just get foreign objects and debris stuck up in the hoof. So when you're looking at your animal and you're trying to determine what's going on with the feet, first thing we want you to do, keep in mind, is if you get an animal that is limping on 1 foot, get a hold of that animal and take the time to look at every foot. A big mistake that people make is they kind of get very fixated on looking at one thing. So you have individuals that'll have an animal that's limping on 1 foot. They grab it, they look at it, they treat it, and they don't bother to look at the other 3. They let them go, and a day later they're limping on the other foot. It's not uncommon to see, hoof rot or hoof scald affecting multiple feet. The other ones may just not be as pronounced or far enough along that they're causing problems. If you got to lay your hands on an animal, we're going to check for things like, is the hoof overgrown? Sometimes there can just be mud that's packed in there that's causing an impaction or some problems. The other thing you want to do is you always want to spread those toes apart, and you want to look as far down in there as you can into the fleshy part of the hoof in between those toes. That's where you're sometimes going to see some of the worst damage. If the hoof needs trimmed, you're going to trim it. You can treat individuals with hoof rot with antibiotics. You can also treat them with topical solutions. You can pack it with copper sulfate with a wrap and wrap it in Coban. You can also pack it. You can utilize things like Dr. Naylor's Hoof and Heel. We use that a lot too. That's a zinc solution that works really well. I guess the downside that you will notice from using things like copper sulfate and zinc is a lot of times if the hoof, or especially if you go as far as using formaldehyde or some kind of formaldehyde solution, is it can make that hoof very, very hard. And in the future, you may notice difficulties hoof trimming that animal later on down the road. So just something for you to consider. If you're going to take the time to have your hands on that animal, go ahead and check the eyelids as well. Check the famantia, see if, how that's looking. If you got your hands on them, check them out head to toe. You've got them. You might as well go through the motions. So something for you to consider. So let's see what we've got here. Is having people raise breeding stock off your farm common? And what are some of those deals? So you can work with individuals to raise breeding stock for you off of your farm. This is a great way to work out other issues that you may have with your farm. So I co-op with other farms to where I have lots and lots of males. I have lots and lots of bucks. I have lots and lots of rams, and that turns into an issue. So what I'll do is if I have a really good ram that maybe I don't want to get rid of, I'll work with a friend and I'll say, hey, I will let you use this ram for a year if you want to keep him and feed him and house him on your property. It helps me out. It helps you out. It works well for everybody. You just have to know the individuals that you're dealing with. I've had individuals before where I tried to work out a deal with them and I left a buck at their farm. I had an individual sing me a sad story about how they needed a buck and they had one that had some issues and it was late in the season, and I let him borrow it, and then he turned around and leased it out to somebody else. So make sure you know the individuals that you're dealing with. Most people are good, but there's a few people out there that'll try to burn you. So it is what it is. Of course, that's the same thing with all business dealings. So something that you'll want to keep in mind, but yeah, it can really pay dividends. The other thing that can work really well for you is if you're trying to utilize the ram effect. That is to say, you're trying to synchronize your ewes or your does through introduction of a male that, you don't have a male on your farm and you bring a male in, you're trying to synchronize them. That's a great way that you can do that as well. You can maybe put all of your males on another farm that's a good distance away from your farm. Again, you just have to know the individuals that you're talking to. So I have a pretty close-knit group of individuals that I work exclusively with, and that I know that I can trust. I know that how they take care of their animals, and so I don't usually have any problems working with them. Another thing that I will say is, buying males, especially if you're getting started, can be a bit much, from a financial standpoint. The issue is, if you're starting off with 2 ewes and a ram, and now those ewes the next year, maybe you get lucky and they have females. Well, now you've got a ram that you may not want to breed back to them because he's related to them. People ask me a lot. They say, well, when should I consider line breeding? When should I consider inbreeding? Things like that. The only time you should ever consider breeding back in those males into their offspring is if you're completely happy with what you have. When you see line breeding happen a lot, where you're breeding back in genetics back into themselves, is when you have farms that are very, very happy with the genetics that they have, and they want to keep that genetic profile. They don't want to introduce anything new into the farm. It's not, line breeding is not something that's done to save money. Line breeding is done to maintain a very specific set of genetic traits that individuals want to keep in their flock. So you lose some of that hybrid vigor when you do that. Hybrid vigor is when you're bringing new genetics in, genetics that have been apart for a while, but you can often maintain body conformation and other things that you may have that you may like. So something to keep in mind there. So Tim said, what do you think about game plot mixes for goats? I think you can do better. I think you would want to talk to the seed dealers in your area. It's not bad. A lot of times you're going to see things like chicory, other legumes like clover. You just have to talk to your local seed guy and just let them know what you have, what your goals are, what your soil type is like. In almost all of your communities, you're going to find there's probably seed dealers out there that are a wealth of knowledge. They know your area, they know your soil type, they know your rainfall, and they can hit that mark that you need hit. If you go to them and say, hey, I want to plant this time of year and I want to harvest this time or whatever, work with them, see what they have to say, see what they tell you works, see what they tell you may not work. Some guys have really good luck utilizing things like turnips. Other people plant very quick growing things, brown midrib things. You have Sudan grass. You have Sudan grass mixes. You have teff grass. All kinds of different things. The one thing I will tell you about clover is unless you are 100% sure that you want to integrate clover into your pasture or onto your property, which chances are you probably already have some anyways, but once you put clover out there, you will have clover forever. Good luck getting rid of it. You're going to have to go through and spray it down, burn it down with 2,4-D or something like that. And then you're still probably not going to get all of it. So something to keep in mind. The other thing to learn about is, okay, how difficult is it to grow this? You may look in the book and see something that sounds fantastic. You're like, man, this is a ton of protein. It's non-bloating. We take plants like bird's foot trefoil, for example. Like, okay, it's a really good legume. It is really high in protein. It doesn't cause bloat. It's a non-bloating legume. And so you're like, wow, this is awesome. And then you talk to people that have tried to grow it and have failed disastrously. Bird's foot trefoil in some areas can be a bear to get to grow. So that's just one example. I don't want you to spend a bunch of money on that and then have problems. Other plants, such as buckwheat. Buckwheat will grow super fast, and it'll get this nice, huge, beautiful leaf on it. But the problem with buckwheat is it causes photosensitivity in their skin. And so if you feed them too much buckwheat, they'll start getting skin lesions and sunburns and all kinds of other stuff. So it's always something. So I would say talk to the local feed guy, talk to the local seed guy, see what he or she, I should say, has to say, and go from there. So, all right. Moving on. Hi, Cheryl. Nice to see you again. I would like to start self-feeding for my does and kids using soy holes with alfalfa pellets, rolled oats, and black oat sunflower seeds. What ration division and how do I start? Well, that is a highly complex question that I would have to sit down with pencil and paper and crunch the numbers on to see. The other thing that you would have to see is, do they really need all of that? We have lots of farms that self-feed really, really well with things just like we talked to Rick Adams, where he's feeding just soybean hulls. He doesn't have to worry about them bloating. He doesn't have to worry about overeating any of that stuff. And it does absolutely just fine. So you have to crunch the numbers. You have to look at the dollars and cents and say, okay, is this, can I justify the cost of this based off of what I am getting? And that's something that I don't know. We would have to look at, what do you want to hit specifically as far as fat is concerned? What do we want to hit as far as carbohydrates, fiber, and things like that, and go from there. So the best thing I can tell you, Cheryl, in that case is to send me an email or hop on the Tack box and ask the same question, so you can give me a little bit more time to crunch the numbers so I can give you that. There's a lot of math involved with figuring all of that up. I have a computer friend I may hit up and see if I can make some kind of computer program where I can more easily figure this stuff out. But as of right now, I'm rather archaic and I do it all by hand. So, great question, just not something that I can answer right now. Now, when it comes to integration, that is a completely other thing that I think we can spend a little bit of time talking about. So, when it comes to integrating animals and changing up food stuff, changing up either the quantity, the amount, anything, even if it's the same quantity and the same nutritional value, but a different brand of feed, we always want to be very, very cautious. I don't ever want to see someone do any abrupt feed changes with ewes or does in late gestation. Scientific evidence shows us without a doubt that this most definitely sets animals up for things like pregnancy toxemia. Anything that's going to cause them to go off of feed for any amount of time can spiral out of control, and we end up with things like ketosis and other problems. So I don't ever want to see you do any extreme changes. The other thing that I would tell you is you want to make sure that you mix and change gradually. So what do we do with puppies or cats? Well, if we change them from one food to the other, we slowly mix them, half and half or a little bit at a time, and we transition them from one feed to another. These animals are no different. You don't want to over do things too quickly and end up having them get scours or anything like that. Overeating is an issue. So we talk about Clostridium, the importance of giving CD vaccinations, that Clostridium type C and D. And a lot of times you'll hear, especially some of the old timers will refer to it as overeating disease, or in certain geographical locations, you may hear Clostridium referred to as overeating disease. And the reality of that is because when the animal overeats and overindulges in that food, it causes the Clostridium bacterium to bloom out of control, and it releases toxins into the body and can kill the animal. Even if you vaccinate your animals against that, which I just think it's something everybody should do. I think if there's one vaccine I think everybody should give, I think it's CD&T, Clostridium type C and D, and tetanus. It's almost unavoidable. Tetanus is everywhere. They can cut themselves and get it. They can nick themselves and get it. Ear tagging, tail docking, stepping on a sharp piece of metal, cutting themselves on a fence, whatever. It's not worth losing an animal over. And the Clostridium, all it takes is for your animal to get out one time, break down a fence. If you've been farming long enough, you've had animals get out, or somebody come over and feed them, overfeed them, or you accidentally spill a bag of feed. You ever have the bottom rip out of a feed bag before? I have. And next thing you know, you're swarmed with animals that are gorging themselves. There's too many variables that for, a 5-cent shot or a 50-cent shot, it's like, it is what it is. Again, just my 2 cents. Take it as you will. So we talk about feeding and the importance of the CD&T vaccine, but the other thing is bloat. Even if you have an animal that is protected from Clostridium, they are still at risk of developing either frothy bloat or abomasum bloat from getting into that feed trough and eating too much too fast. Of course, depending on what it is that you're feeding them. So you want to introduce them slowly. Animals that are on full feed, it just scares the dickens out of people. We get that a lot from individuals that are just getting into sheep and goat farming, and we talk about some of our market babies being on free choice creep. They're like, oh Lord, I could never put them on free choice creep. They'll just go in there and they'll eat till they die. My neighbor Selma or my neighbor Patty told me that if I feed them, they'll just go in there and eat till they die. Yeah, that's true. If you take an animal that is not used to having free choice feed, and you all of a sudden give them all the food they want, they will go in there and eat themselves to death, possibly. But if you have a lamb or a goat kid that's been raised around free choice creep their entire lives, and they know they can go in and get it whenever they want it, they don't gorge themselves. They'll go in there, they'll eat a little bit, they'll leave. There's no rush. There's no race to see how fast they can eat it because they know that it's going to be there when they come back. With that being said, free choice creep feeding or any free choice feeding comes with a certain amount of responsibility that falls on your hands. You cannot have a free choice feeding operation and let it go empty twice a day or for 4 hours a day. You're defeating the purpose. Then you're going to get gorging and overeating. So if you truly are going to go on a free choice feeding regimen, you need to make sure that you keep that thing full all the time. And of course, you need to work them into that. Again, with lambs and kids, it's a lot easier because you can have them exposed to that from birth. When you're dealing with adults, you may want to limit them. And so questions come up, well, how do I limit them? Same thing comes up about round bales. They're like, well, I want to feed round bales, but I want to limit them. How on earth am I supposed to limit feeding on round bales? Well, easily you just put that round bale in a pen or in an area that's fenced off with a gate, and you only open that gate a few hours a day if that's what you need to do. Or with that creep, you only open it a few hours a day. So you got to work with it. You got to try to use some common sense. Don't do anything too hard, too fast, and just go from there. Good question. Okay. So Tim says, I find with goats, it could be the leg ramming each other has been problems here. So ramming each other is a problem. Even if you have, that's always an issue. Even if you have animals that live together all the time, you can run into issues where they're going to fight. So males kept together, introducing males and keeping males together tends to be two separate problems. Introduction of males with one another, the general school of thought is you either put them to where they are so close that they can't hurt each other, or they have so much room that they can get away from each other. Generally speaking, you're usually going to have one aggressor and one that is not as aggressive, but that's not always the case. You can put two in a pen that are both aggressive, and no matter how much space they have, they're going to beat the snot out of each other. You can take two males and put them in a pen that is very small, small to the point that they're almost shoulder to shoulder, to where they can't get enough speed up. And they just, when I was a kid, my mom used to call it the buddy shirt. Me and my brother, if we didn't get along, we were fighting too much, she'd make us walk around for an hour wearing one giant, double XL t-shirt. I got one armhole, he got the other. And then you just find out really quick that, it's not worth fighting. And we really didn't like each other enough to be around each other that much anyways. Kind of the same mentality with the males. If you put them in a really small pen, and leave them in there, obviously with food and water, for a day or two, they tend to work the problems out. But when it comes to breeding season, all gloves are off, all bets are off. Even two males that are the best bosom buddies and always get along, when you introduce them or have them together during breeding season, you are taking a huge risk. They also need to have a very specific degree of separation between one another. So what I mean by that is a woven wire fence or a high tensile wire fence or a panel is not an adequate degree of separation for two intact males during breeding season, or for that matter, two intact males that don't get along with each other. They will most definitely kill one another through the fence. A good friend of mine, an anesthesiologist that I work with at the hospital, always tells a fun story about his father went out and bought two. When we were kids, his dad went out and bought two very nice horned Dorset rams and brought them home, and came back the next day from work and they were both dead. It was like a 1 in a million shot, but they rammed one another through the fence, and one died instantly and the other staggered off and died shortly thereafter, from what they could tell. So, keep a degree of separation there, and watch your kids and watch yourself. Turning your back on these animals is not knowing where that ram is not smart on your part. You should always know where that ram is. We've talked about before, not petting them, not overhandling them. They are dangerous. Their heads are right at hip and or knee level. I don't know if you've given that much thought, but we've gotten very good at replacing knees and hips, but not something that you want to necessarily deal with if you don't have to. So good questions, but yeah, you can notice some lumping, and it's difficult to say, if that's coming from ramming or not. Baker's on a few acres. So how long does it take for Famacha score to return to normal after worming treatment? Wow. Yeah, right. It's like watching paint dry. So what we're seeing when we're looking at the capillary beds in the eyelids, and this is true for humans as well, anyone suffering from anemia, is we're seeing the capillary bed essentially there in the eyelid. Same thing with these animals, and that red color that you're seeing in there in that capillary bed is reflective of red blood cell count, aka red blood cells carry hemoglobin. Your red blood cells are they're not a donut shape. They're kind of like a pillow shape. They're round and they've got a little divot inside of them. And hemoglobin can attach to that, and it carries oxygen to the body systems, and then it's carrying things like carbon dioxide back out, so through the lungs. And we won't get in the deep weeds of all that, but essentially when you're seeing a lack of that redness in there, what that's reflective of is a lack of red blood cell, basically in the vasculature, in the arteries, and in the bloodstream itself. So when you are seeing Forage, you're seeing that anemia, you're seeing that lack of red color, that tells us that's a sign of some kind of parasite load, usually. It is a sign of some kind of parasite load. Now, what kind of parasite load is that? Well, we don't know. We have to investigate. So it could be worms, it could be lice, it could be mange, it could be liver flukes, it could be a whole slew of different things. So once we rid that animal of that parasite or whatever it is that's causing that anemia, now the body has to make new red blood cells. And so that period of time, it can take a long time. It is a slow, gradual process that takes usually a period of weeks. So what can we do to get that color back in there, to get that red blood cell count back up? Well, we can do lots of different things. We can increase their overall nutrition. We can make sure that they are getting a very good free choice mineral. We can make sure that they're getting the amount of copper that they need. There's a few things that are involved in red blood cell production. So we look at vitamin A, vitamin K, we look at copper, we look at all of these different things that go into red blood cell production, and it takes the body a while to make that. So the best thing you can do post worming or post parasite eradication is nutrition, nutrition, nutrition. Lots and lots of clean, fresh water, lots and lots of good nutrition, and as little stress as possible. The other thing that you want to do is you want to maintain that clean parasite load. Now, with that being said, there's some confusing stuff that you may hear online. Some people don't understand what we just talked about. They don't understand that white in the eyelids is due to a lack of red blood cells. So a lot of times people will instinctively assume that I'll know once my animal is wormed because the color will come back to the eyelid. And so they worm the animal and they check the eyelid and the eyelid's still white. And they say, well, Lord, I must have not wormed them enough. So I'm gonna worm them again. And so you go through this over and over and over. And the reality is you're just not giving them enough time. If anyone ever tells you that my animal had white eyelids, I wormed them, somebody was trying to sell. I'll tell you a story. Last week I was entertaining myself by reading a forum that I don't normally like. But someone said, yep, I used this worming method and my animal's eyelids were white, and I checked them and 2 days later they were dark red. And I'm like, you're a liar. Because obviously two things. One, the person has a truth telling problem. The other thing is they have no idea how this is actually working physiologically. The other thing, and I'm not saying that like all high and mighty, I'm just saying that's just the way it works. So it's well known and you can check it out. If you find what I'm telling you doubtful, check it out. The other thing that you'll notice is bottle jaw. So those red blood cells are twofold. Having proteins in the bloodstream, things like hemoglobin, for example, is a protein. Having proteins in the bloodstream actually keeps fluids where they're supposed to be. Now, when we look at adults, When we get puffy, when we are losing fluids out into our body in places that they're not supposed to be, you'll see it in our faces. In humans, you'll see it in our faces, and you tend to see it in our lower legs. It's well known. You'll see people that are having fluid retention issues, and you'll see they're getting puffy lower legs. In sheep and goats, you're going to see it underneath the jaw, and we so commonly call that bottle jaw. Now, bottle jaw is a symptom of not enough protein, not enough appropriate blood cells and proteins in the bloodstream. So when we're losing this hemoglobin, we're losing these red blood cells and things like that, there's not enough of that pull. We won't get into that, but it's through a process called osmosis. We lose that pull that keeps fluids where they're supposed to be. So when you see bottle jaw, that is simply a symptom of low blood protein levels. Again, it's due to a parasite. So that's another one. You may worm an animal, and then after you worm it, it develops bottle jaw. And then you think, oh Lord, I must need to worm them again. So you keep worming them. The reality is maybe they had a little bit of added blood loss from the worms releasing. And so you're seeing the puffiness in the jaw. There are some artificial things that you can give through a shot that may rectify that bottle jaw short term. Things like vitamin B injections or iron injections may give that blood serum enough pull to get fluids to come back in, and then they may go right back out again. So it's not uncommon to hear people say, I gave my animal injectable iron for anemia and bottle jaw, and it corrected itself, and 2 days later it came back. So how do you do this then? What's the secret sauce? Well, if you really want to do it the right way, if you really want to do it the scientific way, is going to be check the animal's worm load through an actual fecal study, worm the animal, give that animal some time, rest, and good nutrition, and check the worm load again. If the worm load has diminished and it's down where it needs to be, don't worry about the fact that the eyelids are still white. Don't worry about the fact that the animal still hasn't put on a lot of weight yet. You've eliminated the problem. Now it's your turn to give that animal the nutrition it needs to help it rebuild those blood cells and get everything back where it needs to be. So hopefully that helped answer that question. I know I kind of get in the deep weeds sometimes. So hopefully that helped. Cheryl, great. I will hit you up on the Tack box. Thank you. No problem whatsoever. And then it'll be there forever. Once it's in the Tack box, it's in the Tack box forever. So then we can always reflect back to it. The math in feed formulations is confusing. So I understand that can be a problem. Brian, hi Brian. What are your thoughts on boar goats? I'm thinking about trying my luck at goat farming, but would like to have mostly boar. Yeah, so people use boar goats and they love them. We have boar goats on our farm. I think a lot of it is the same. So here's the thing about boar goats. Boar goats are like nachos. There's some nachos that I've had that I really like, and then there's some nachos that I have that I'm like, meh, it's okay. Like everybody's got or brisket or fill in the blank, carrot cake. I like carrot cake too. I've had really good carrot cake. I've had really bad carrot cake. It's all carrot cake. It's the same thing with these animals, right? It's like you go to a show and you're like, I raise boar goats, and then you go to a boar goat show and you're like, oh my God, I have the saddest looking boar goats I've ever seen. Like I didn't even realize goats like that existed. And it's the same thing with all the different breeds of sheep. There's different variants within the breed. You may be able to find someone that raises boar goats that have really, really good milk production. You may be able to find people that have boar goats that have really, really good meat production. You may have individuals that raise a really hardy, quote unquote, worm resistant boar goat that they're happy with. So I want you to find that goat species, or excuse me, I want you to find that goat type that you like. And I want you to then find an individual that raises that type that you most desire on your farm. Try to find someone that's going to raise them or is currently raising that breed. wow, that was painful. Trying to think of the word breed, it was just like it was gone. Try to find someone that's raising that breed in a style that is similar to the one that you want. Don't make the mistake, and this is important for everyone. Uh, there's a lot of people out there that will tell you, oh, just get those goats or get those sheep and throw them out on pasture and just let them go, and it'll just be magical, and they'll all die. You can't go out and get a trailer full of club lambs that are raised for 4-H and for show and throw them out on your open pasture and just give them water and expect them to thrive and do great. Just the same thing with boar goats. If you go to a gentleman or a gal that's raising really, really nice show goats, and your goal is you want to bring them home and free range them, that might not, those may not correlate with each other. You can raise animals anywhere. You can put them in confinement. You can put them out on pasture. You can do like we do here. We blend it. We put them out on pasture. We also have some in confinement. As long as you're happy, the animal's happy and healthy, who cares? But find that animal that best suits your needs and what you want to feed and how you want to feed and do all that stuff, and just do some legwork on that. Boar goats are really awesome. We have boar goats. I really like them. Boy, there's not a whole lot of breeds of goat in particular that I would necessarily steer you away from. It would just depend on what it is that you want. Kikos are nice meat goats. I've seen some really nice Kikos. I've seen some really nice crosses between dairy breeds and boar goats that are really great. We have some dairy boar crosses here on our farm that I really like. They've got really, really heavy milk production, but they tend to have a little bit higher carcass quality. I have some boar Nigerian dwarf crosses that just blow people's minds. They come out and look at them and they're like, what in the heck is that thing? Because they're a medium build. They're much, much bigger than you would expect to come out of a Nigerian dwarf. But they're very, very stout and stocky. And they're like, what in the world is that? And I tell them all the time, I'm like, well, it's a Nigerian dwarf boar cross. And they just can't believe it. So yeah, find the breed that you like, and then find someone that's getting them as close to, that's raising them in the same manner as you would like to raise them. And I think you'll be fine. And there's lots of people that'll be willing to work with you and happy to help you out. And just go from there. So good question. I don't know if that was really the exact answer that you needed, but I think should help. What do you think about the Riddell use and that Sandy Brock uses with IDF and Suffolk Rams as terminal sires? They seem to be very prolific, maybe the best. Again, so you're getting into what do you want to raise? Is there a best? No. There may be a best for you in your situation. Sandy raises her livestock in a very specific way. She has lots and lots of money, lots and lots of space, and lots of feed. Her animals don't have to work for their feed. The feed's brought to them. I don't want to say they're temperature controlled or climate controlled environment, but they don't have a lot of the stressors on them that other people may experience due to weather, cold, wind, rain, things like that. It's a very controlled environment. So in a very controlled, and I like her, so don't take this as me beating her up at all. I think you just have to look at it for what it is. Just do the 30,000 foot view and just say, okay, I'm going to look at this for what it is. Start off broad and work your way down. These are animals in a very controlled environment that have very low stress and have to put out very low effort. They're very well taken care of. They don't carry parasite loads, none of that stuff. So in that situation, I would expect any breed to do its best as far as from a genetic standpoint. So if you're wanting prolificity, there's multiple breeds that you could put in a situation like that would give you tons and tons and tons of babies. And I'm glad you brought this up because this was a point that I wanted to make. They will give you tons and tons and tons of babies. You could use a polypay. You could use a Rideau. You could use um, uh, uh, trying to think of some of the Finn. I mean, Finns, good Lord, those things pop out babies like nobody's business. And a black-faced terminal sire has always been, I don't want to say always, I hate using terms like always, never, but I will tell you that when it comes to meat production, black-faced terminal sire has always, see, I did it again, has primarily been the male of choice for larger, faster growing carcass size. Now we're seeing a lot of individuals starting to jump ship from the black-faced terminal sires to things like Dorper, but that's a whole nother conversation. But here's 2 points that I want to make. One, it's a very controlled environment. So if you're buying, just like I said to Brian, if you're going to buy this animal that's being raised this way and you're going to bring it into your farm, which is raising them completely different, it would be quite silly for you to expect the same results. So again, if you really dig those results that someone's getting and you want to do the same setup that they are, then yeah, I would reasonably expect you to get similar results. But if you're going to start fiddling things and make it your own, you need to be prepared for not getting the same amount of results. The other thing that you have to consider, and I am not, before I get flamed on this and get emails and hate mail and stuff like that, I am not accusing anyone of doing anything. I don't know how people do things on their farms within reason. I sure as heck don't know the way Sandy Brock does things on her farms. But let me tell you a couple quick stories. I went to a farm that raises nationally known a certain breed of sheep or goat. I won't even tell you which one. They raise a naturally well-known breed of sheep or goat. They win. They're at nationals. Everybody wants them. They love them. Go to the farm, and there is a barn full of females that are not of the breed that this guy or gal is well known for. Completely different breed. Just for the sake of humor, we'll say it's sheep, and I go in and it's a completely different breed of sheep. All ewes, all there, and they're all pregnant. And I say to this individual, I say, well, why are all these different breeds in here? And this individual says to me, well, they're all surrogate mothers. They're the mothers of my babies. This breed that I sell, they're not the best mothers and they don't do that great. So what we do is we use these recip moms, we use these other mothers that are well known for being very good mothers, and we put the egg and the sperm inside of them. In this case, they put the embryo inside of them. They let that mom raise them, birth them, feed them, raise them, and then they sell that breed. And people come and look at that. By that point, those ewes or does are long gone. They look at these babies and they say, wow, these things are great. I love the size and all this, and I'm going to buy some and bring it to my farm. And they bring it to their farm, and then they fall apart, and they're horrible mothers, and they can't deliver their babies, and they have all these problems. And people say, how on earth did this happen? Because you didn't get what you thought you were getting. Because there are things that people do behind closed doors that you have no idea. So when it comes to breeding these animals, be it goats or be it or sheep, and they're saying, well, I'm having triplets like crazy or twins like crazy, you have to ask the question, what did you give them to cause them to go into estrus? Did you give them medication to cause them to go into estrus? Did you give them a cedar? Did you give them a progesterone suppository followed by an injection of some other hormone that caused them to go into estrus? Because if you did, I'm not interested in how many babies they have, because what you're selling me is not reality. What you're telling me is, oh, this ewe always has twins. Well, you may have failed to mention that ewe always gets injected with hormones. So you have to be really careful at taking things at face value. You got to look at the big picture. That's for sure. But before you marry that animal, you have to ask those hard questions. We kind of, I don't want to say we laugh about it, but we do talk about it a lot when I'm talking to other breeders. If I know that these breeders are using hormones to cause those ewes or does to go into estrus, a lot of times I don't even bother asking them, does it have twins or does it have triplets? Because it's all skewed anyways. It's all under hormonal control. So it's very difficult to know. Um, but again, find what you want and go from there. And here's the other thing that I think warrants looking at. We raise lots of different breeds here on Linessa Farms. It's in the nature of what we do because we want to be able to educate people. So, we've got 12, 14 different breeds of sheep. We may have 8 or 10 different breeds of goats here on our farm. And I get to see some very interesting things as far as genetics are concerned. Now, I have some ewes that have triplets, consistently have triplets. And I have some ewes that have twins. Now, here's something that I want to talk with you about. If I have a ewe that always has triplets, and I have a ewe that always has twins, and after 8 weeks, when I wean them, let's say I have my two twins are now 60 pounds, and my twin lambs are now 60 pounds apiece, and my triplets are now 40 pounds apiece. Okay. Uh, what's better? What do I want? Do I want two 60-pound lambs or do I want three 40-pound lambs? They both equal a total weight amount of 120 pounds. So which one's going to sell better? Which one do my purchasers want? Is my purchaser going to come out to my farm and look at that 40-pound or 30-pound lamb and say, "Oh, that's the one that I want. I want that skinny one there, or that one that doesn't have very good muscle development," or do they want that big 60-pounder? Well, that's a question that warrants a good hard look. Just because an animal has lots and lots of babies doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to pay you dividends when it comes to the sale barn. The sale barn is based off of a couple different things, but the first and most thing that it's based off of as far as market animals are concerned is weight. They want a very specific animal that has a very specific build that's at a very specific weight. And if you're on the struggle bus trying to get those triplets up to the weight that you need, or it takes them 3 times as long to get up there, you're not making any money. Plus, it's like, okay, you can have moms that'll throw triplets all the live long day, but if they can't take care of them, then what are you doing? So you got to look at feed conversion ratio too. There's a lot to it. You got to be careful online, when these people are telling you things, or if they're telling you a selling point, well, they always have triplets. Oh, okay, great. Is that going to work for me? Or how big are they? You have 3 and they're tiny, shoot, maybe I'd rather have one big single. I don't know. So questions definitely that you need to ask yourself as you move along with things. Catherine White, we have 2 ewes, almost 1 year old on 1 acre. We're hoping to get more land soon. I'd like to wait on breeding them until we have more land. Is it detrimental to their health if they're older? So we're getting into conjecture here, and there's not a lot of really good, reliable scientific data on this subject. Long-term productivity, Cornell has said in the past that breeding a ewe as soon as she is physically able to do so, healthfully, not just because she can get pregnant doesn't mean she should, but as soon as that ewe is ready, breeding her every year is healthier for the mom, leads to less reproductive problems, and obviously it's better for your pocketbook. So the consensus out there, I will tell you, although there's not a lot of information, is you need to breed them when they're ready to breed, and you need to keep breeding them at least once a season when they naturally go into estrus. But then again, you don't have to. We've had some ewes that we've idled before. We don't necessarily keep those on our farm because if they can't have babies for us, they're of no use to us. Not to sound cold about that, but that I'm sure that makes sense if you're raising for meat. So, but we've had other ones too that it's taken them 3 years before they got pregnant, and then after that they were fine. So I'm not in the habit of usually doing that, but we have done that with some special ones before that had sentimental value, whatever. So something just to consider. Do I think it's going to be detrimental to them if you idle them? No. If you're only going to have a couple, I would say go ahead and breed them anyways. And then at least, if you have 1 acre and you have 2 ewes and you put in the time to keep it clean, um, I think you'd be okay. You'd have two. They have two babies each. You can pretty much sell them at weaning, or maybe you get something that's going to be a good replacement ewe. I don't know. I would encourage you to breed them while you're going and while you're learning, but you don't have to. That's just my 2 cents. So I don't have a straight answer for you. I think you're going to be okay either way. I think it's just something that you and your family are going to sit down and look at and say, this is what's right for us and this is what we want to do, and kind of go from there. All right. David Kane. Hi, David. I rotational graze. Cool. I need to wean 3 surprise lambs off 2 moms out of 15. Do I split across the farm along solid fences? No. So we would split across the farm, because, man, I have no kidding. I've seen moms nurse a baby through a fence. Yeah, just something that I've seen happen. The other thing is we don't want to encourage them to hurt themselves. And sometimes, it's their baby, or that baby's starving, and it thinks it's starving and it wants to get back through that fence to mom. We don't want to cause any problems where they might hurt themselves, get stuck or anything. So we always like to keep that degree of separation between them, just to keep problems from forming and from encouraging them to learn bad habits. Once an animal learns how to get through a fence, or they learn that the electric fence only hurts for a minute and then it doesn't hurt too bad, like, you're done. You might as well move them somewhere else, because trying to break them of that is going to be a huge problem. We have a friend that has some Great Pyrenees on his farm, and they've learned that the fence only hurts for a second, and then they just run through it. And after that, it was like, you might as well just get rid of it, because they're not going to respect it ever again. The big thing is we don't want them getting caught up, strung up in the electric fence, or, getting caught breaking a leg or anything else. I would normally encourage you to keep the babies where they are and move the moms. But, and we talked about this before, you got to be real careful with that, because if you have nursing babies in with a bunch of other moms and you move those moms and leave those babies where they are, you're really going to incentivize those babies to start running around trying to steal milk off of other moms. And we don't want to steal milk that belongs to someone else, or them to start pushing out other babies. So I would consider moving. The lambs, have a good degree of separation, and go from there. Just from what I've seen and what I've experienced. You made several very good points. I stand corrected. Thank you. No, I don't think you're corrected. I think we just made it a different way of looking at it. So look at it that way. That's the beauty of having conversations with your friends, is that they're going to say things that you never thought of. And that's the problem with, that's the problem with subject matter experts. And that's the problem with limiting your exposure to different people. And I won't get on my bandwagon about the importance of you guys exposing yourselves to lots and lots of different ideas and thoughts, because what works for one person may not work for another. And so I just gave you something different to think about. So, I don't think what you're seeing is wrong. I just gave you something different to think about. And I'm sure if you and I had a conversation about something else, you would probably have something to say. So this isn't really telephone, so I can't necessarily hear what you have to say, but I'm sure you have things that would give me a different perspective on things as well. So, and it happens all the time, and that's a good thing. The problem with subject matter experts is there's not anyone out there telling them there's a different way to do things other than what they're doing. Subject matter expert just says, this is how it is, and this is what you do. And people just say yes. And then if you're good enough at being a subject matter expert, you'll start to get cronies that will shield you from other people. So then even if someone else from outside tries to come in and tell you, like, well, there's a better way to do this. Your cronies will be like, you shut your mouth. You know, Tim knows what he's doing. Leave him alone. And man, I learn new stuff. I don't run my farm this year the way that I ran it last year, and I didn't run it last year the way I ran it the year before. Every single time I go to a different farm and meet with somebody or talk with somebody, I find new ways or better ways or different ways of doing things that work. The only other, let's see, I talked about numbers and carcasses, I talked about limping, and I talked about mange. The only last thing that I wanted to talk briefly about was toltrazuril. So I've been getting lots and lots of questions recently about toltrazuril. Toltrazuril is a drug that you can give for coccidia. It works really, really well. Check out the literature on it. You can check it out Merck Veterinary Manual, other places. The United States is one of the hardest places to get toltrazuril, but you can get it. Outside of the United States, they use it freely. It's usually used under the name of Baycox. We've been getting a lot of people calling us recently that have been asking me questions like, what should toltrazuril look like? Or what's the thickness of it and things like that. There are multiple different toltrazuril powders. Some toltrazuril powders are made of a crystallized water-soluble powder. Other toltrazuril powders are not water-soluble at all, and are very, very difficult to blend. And so you may see toltrazuril that is like a pale white, and you can actually look into it and you can actually see little itty bitty flakes of the actual medication. You may get toltrazuril that is just as white as milk and you can't see through it at all. You may get toltrazuril that's somewhere in the middle. You may get toltrazuril that's really thick. You may get toltrazuril that's really thin. It depends on what they suspend it in. For some reason, some people have decided that they need to dissolve the toltrazuril, which they don't have to do it. The problem with toltrazuril is it does not dissolve very well. It will dissolve really, really well in some chemicals. And unfortunately, some of those chemicals are very strong laxatives. So you want to be very cautious if you're purchasing toltrazuril that you read up on it and you see what it is, that specific brand, you read the label and see what it says there. See if it's what it's suspended in. If it's suspended in something called propylene glycol, that's a problem, because if you read up on propylene glycol, it is a very powerful laxative. So now you are giving your animal a very powerful laxative with medication in it. Like, that'd be like somebody coming to you and saying, here, you can give, I want you to take this medication, but just so you know, it's going to give you diarrhea really, really bad. So you got to be cautious. Read the ingredients on these things when you're buying them from people and make sure that you're happy with what's in it. But as far as like the look of it, there is no general consensus regarding the look of it. The only other thing I think that I wanted to talk about tonight was when we talk about all natural remedies and potions and elixirs and things like that. There are things out there that are all natural that are extremely useful and extremely potent and work really, really well. When aspirin first came about, it was made of willow tree bark. There's drugs out there that we use in anesthesia that are made from, for instance, atropine. Atropine's made from foxglove. And garlic has medicinal properties that work really well. There's tons of things out there that have medicinal properties, but it doesn't mean that it's safe for your animal. So always be cautious when you're using all natural things. Joe Salatin likes to talk about some cleaning solution that he worms his animals with. And people call me and they've said, well, they said to use this. And I look at the label and it's all natural. And I'm like, yeah, it's all natural. If you're seeing words in the ingredients and you don't know what that word is, you need to Google it. So I will tell you, I don't know Joe. I don't worm the way he worms. I have nothing against him. If you like him and it works, then go nuts. Again, different structure, different folks. But this wormer, somebody called me and they're like, well, I don't want to use chemical wormers on my animals. I want to use this. I can't even think of what it's called. So I'm like, okay. So I check it out. I look it up for them. What's the ingredient in it? Lye. Have you ever heard of lye? Now they didn't put it in as lye. They used the chemical name for it instead, which doesn't sound like lye. But for those of you that don't know what lye is, it's used in soap making. It's used to help decompose bodies and things like that. If you get it on your skin, it will burn you very, very badly. You will have chemical reactions with it. And so I'm looking at this, I'm like, yeah, no wonder this is worming these animals. It has lye in it. Like if I gave you, I'm telling you right now, honest to goodness, if I had the chance, if I had worms and I had to worm myself and someone gave me the choice between ivermectin, which basically they won the Nobel Prize for its effectiveness. We've used it over and over and over the world round for things like malaria, and it's extremely effective with extremely safe, scientifically proven usage. And I know scientifically proven doesn't mean quite what it used to, but I'm still going to say it. I will take ivermectin every day of the week and twice on Sunday, as opposed to drinking lye. So you have to look at what the ingredients are and educate yourself. Do not take people's word for it. If I tell you something new that you're going to change your whole operation for, I really expect you to go out and fact check me. Like, you have to be cautious. Like it's your family, it's your farm, it's your livelihood. Be careful. So that's all I'm telling you. Do your homework. All right. I ordered the veterinarian pipestone book today. I've read reviews saying it's more of a book for sheep rather than goats. Almost everything in that book is interchangeable between sheep and goats. So you're going to find the gee whiz nuts and bolts of that thing and the points that it's driving home, other than a few very specific things that may be sheep or goat, dealing with copper and things like that. I would say 90% of that book is going to be usable for both sheep and goats. But let me know what you think once you get it and read it over. I think you'll love it. I love the way that it's laid out. I don't get anything for steering you in that direction. So check it out and see what you think and let me know. I'll be interested to see what you think. Okay. I moved the kids away from mama and bottle fed after 3 days, as at that time the greedy ones are separate at feeding, so I can milk the moms. After a month, I feed dairy milk from Jersey cow pellet. Okay, so just be careful when bottle feeding. We talked about this before. Something for you to keep in mind: we don't want to bottle feed too long. Significantly increases our risk for abomasum bloat. In these animals significantly once these animals start getting past 5 to 6 weeks of age. We want to ideally have them weaned at that point. There's some volatile fatty acids and some other things that are made in the rumen when they're drinking larger quantities of milk at that time. So just something to keep in mind. If you have to feed them at later ages, we recommend that you limit them as much as possible and you cold feed them to keep them from drinking it too much too fast. But good deal. All right. Ahmed, one last question, Tim. In the last 2 years, people all across Egypt have been reporting a noticeable drop in goats and sheep breeding frequency. Well, that's very interesting. So when we look at changes in breeding frequency, we look first at overall health changes in the animal, be it, have you had any stressors, have you had any disease processes or anything like that that may have been stressing those animals. The second thing that we look for is we look for any changes in feeds. Processed feeds that may be higher in things like phytoestrogens or other feeds that may have effects on overall estrogen or testosterone levels in animals. So certain types of clover have been known to have breeding effects on animals due to these phytoestrogens. And then the last thing that we look at is we look at temperature. Temperature and temperature variances and swings can have a profound effect on breeding regularity and animals losing embryos that are growing inside of them. I will give you an example. Trying to artificially induce animals, ewes or does, in the fall here in North America can be very tricky because it appears that if we do successfully get a ewe or a doe pregnant, and during the first couple weeks of pregnancy, she experiences a very hot, stressful environment, a lot of times they will absorb those embryos and they will not remain pregnant. So we usually have an issue every couple years where a lot of the show guys will give a cedar, a progesterone suppository, followed by a shot, and we'll breed them and land them. And then, sure as heck, we will have a spike in temperature. We'll have one of those weeks in late August, early September, where the temperature is up in the high 90s Fahrenheit, and they just lose them all. And then they got to rebreed all of them. So what you can see in these volatile swings, I'm not going to get into the politics of global warming and all that stuff here. What I will tell you is we've struggled with this over the past 2 to 3 years here in Indiana, where I live. We have had very high heats that have kind of come out of nowhere in the fall months that we normally wouldn't expect it. It's very stressful on the ewes. We've had some ewes that were pregnant that then became not pregnant, that need to be rebred. So you have to be very, very cautious. If you're in a situation where you introduce a ram or a buck to a group of breeding females and you think they're all pregnant, you take that buck out and now they're exposed to some kind of environmental stressor that causes them to now become not pregnant. You may, and you don't get them tested, you may not notice for months and months. So that's a huge issue. So environmental stressors are one of the number one factors that are going to change that, and that we've seen, and not just here in the United States, but all across the world. So something for you to consider. Okay, good question. All right, where am I at? Can you use safeguard wormer block for goats? Don't know. Yeah, great question that I just don't know. Yeah, great question. I'll have to look that up for you. I don't like medicated blocks outwardly because I can't control how much they get. The problem that I have with blocks or with feeding in mass in that case is a lot of times your big strong ones uh, get what they need and your little ones may get pushed out. My experience that I can relate to this is bloat guard blocks. They're a soft, kind of a chewy block that they'll crumble. Bloat guard blocks have a medication in them that keep animals from bloating when they go out on pasture. A lot of times in the past, I would utilize bloat guard blocks before going out to pasture to make sure that when I cut them loose, because my pasture is so dense with legumes, I wanted to protect them against getting bloat. Well, the problem is if I put it in with the animals, my big, strong, healthy animals get in there and eat it. And then if anybody smaller tries to get in, they butt them away. And so now I've got half my animals are getting in, the other half aren't. So I would say if you're going to go down the road of giving a block, just be cautious. Maybe if you do find that it does in fact work, maybe take a hammer and a chisel and break it in half or break it in quarters. Maybe separate your animals out to where you're sure that everyone is getting their fair share. Okay. Cheryl says the Pipestone book is great. It is. It is a pretty awesome book. I like it. Where bucks and rams are not entering into heat even during the season, this happens all across Egypt, and some have contributed to climate change. Yeah, heat stress, or the phytoestrogens in there. Those are the first two things that come to mind. If it's not a feed change issue, then I would almost surely say that it's going to be some kind of issue with environmental stress. So yeah, absolutely. We will notice similar animal behavior if the temperatures are just scorching hot. It's too much stress on that animal to just maintain their body systems to function properly, and they just don't breed as well. Yeah. Thank you. I feed pellets after the month with high quality shrubs. Good, good. So keep the nutrition up when you're weaning your animals, and to keep them healthy and to recover appropriately. And I think that's the best that anyone can do. Uh, don't neglect your minerals. Um, I think I think that's something that people don't pay enough attention to, is to get those animals that well-rounded, to get the animal the well-rounded nutrition that it needs. Everything that we take into our body gets dismantled, re-put together. That's a word, re-put together. It gets dismantled and it gets assembled into what our body needs. So if you take in protein, for instance, into your body is going to break that protein down into its amino acids, and then it's going to rebuild those amino acids into the different proteins that it needs for the building blocks of your body structures. Um, so and when it comes to vitamins and minerals, they're the same way. Your body's going to utilize what it can, and it's going to get rid of if it gets too much. So well-rounded, well-balanced diets that are appropriate for your animal are very, very important, and very important for you to make sure that you're getting that animal the minerals and the appropriate quantity that it needs. Very good info tonight. Thanks. All of your viewers need to hit the like button. Thank you. Yeah, the like button helps us out a lot. I really do appreciate it. I used to feel kind of bad um, about asking for likes and subscribes, and if you want to be competitive on here, you just have to. If I get 5 likes and then the next guy gets 10, they're just going to assume that people like watching that person's more than me, and so they're going to get the views. So it is what it is. Especially with boar goats lately, boar goats became a trend in Egypt, and they have been importing large numbers of bucks from South Africa. So the other thing that you're going to notice is some animals and some breeds and some groups of specific breeds will breed better under certain stressors. So in the case of sheep, for example, certain hours of daylight will cause them to go into estrus better or not as well. Some are very heat tolerant, some are not. Boar goats, typically were raised for hot, stressful environments, but again, it may depend on where they got them from. So very interesting. I will remember that. So Conrad says, why don't you use free choice sodium bicarb for bloat? We do use free choice sodium bicarb for our animals. Actually, our animals get free choice sodium bicarb all the time. So they can utilize that free choice sodium bicarb for, it helps with lots of things. It helps with rumen acidosis in general. It helps to prevent founder, or laminitis, you would better know it as in sheep and goats, and it also helps to prevent bloat in general, or to treat bloat. And so when our animals are out on free range pasture here, they have free choice sodium bicarb all the time, and you'll notice it'll wax and wane. They'll go through periods of time where they use a lot of it, and then you go through other periods of time where they don't use too much at all, depending kind of on what they get into. A very unique situation that we run into here is that we have some pastures, unfortunately or fortunately, however you want to look at it, here on our farm that are almost all clover. Almost the whole darn thing is clover. You walk out there and it's just nothing but clover, up to your thigh as far as you can see. And it's just a little too much, a little too fast for the animals. So knock on wood, I haven't lost any to bloat. But as an insurance policy, if I'm going to be turning them out on something that's that lush and that green, and especially if we're having a very wet season to where it's not really drying out well enough that they're getting out there on wetter stuff, I will at times utilize a bloat guard block, but you don't always have to do that. You can get around that with good animal husbandry practices most of the time. Don't put animals out on new pasture hungry. Make sure that the animals are healthy. Don't put them out on pasture when it's wet, when that grass or those legumes are wet. Offer them free choice sodium bicarb before and during their time out there on pasture. Keep an eye on them. Keep a bottle of TheraBloat on hand at all times in case you need it for emergency purposes, and make sure they have free choice water. I try to put my animals out on pasture full. I'll try to feed them and make sure they're full before I send them out there so they don't overeat. But yeah, absolutely great question. I think sodium bicarb is a often overlooked and undervalued uh, trick of the trade for anyone raising sheep or goats. Ahmed, my friend, no worries. We're glad that you're here. It's nice that you bring a new range of questions to the show and a different perspective. So we value that. I had no problem following you. I think we did just fine. And I think your questions led to some really good, actually, all of you. The fact that you guys participate and you ask questions, yes, tough questions. I appreciate that. It makes this far more beneficial for everyone. And just remember, if you have a question, chances are somebody else has the same question. Or maybe we can shed some light on something that somebody hasn't thought of. Or maybe you give me something to think about that I haven't thought of. I'm learning just like you guys are. So you can think of this more as a conversation than a lecture or anything like that. It's just nice to come on here and visit with you guys. So I appreciate it. For those of you that are repeat visitors, I appreciate you coming back. For those of you that are new, I hope you continue to come back. If you want to get more of this, make sure to check out our videos and hop on Linessa Farms Tack Box on Facebook. It's our online forum where you can ask questions as well. That's it. I'm Tim from Linessa Farms Specialty and Heirloom Livestock. Thanks for joining us again today, and I look forward to seeing all of you again next time.